Single mom with kids. Freezing in the forest. What this bear did put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The winter wind howled through the tall pines, carrying snowflakes that stung like tiny needles against exposed skin. Inside a small, worn tent, Sarah Mitchell pulled her two children closer, wrapping her arms around their shivering bodies. 8-year-old Lily's teeth chattered uncontrollably, while 4-year-old Noah's lips had taken on a frightening bluish tint. The thin sleeping bags they huddled in did little to protect them from the bitter cold that had descended upon the forest without warning. "Mommy, I'm so cold," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "When can we go home?" Sarah fought back tears as she stroked her daughter's hair. "Soon, sweetheart. Very soon." The lie tasted bitter on her lips. The truth was far more terrifying. Their car had broken down miles from the main road, their cell phones had no signal, and the snowstorm had come out of nowhere, trapping them in this nightmare. Outside the tent, something large moved through the snow. Heavy footsteps crunched closer, and a shadow fell across the thin fabric wall. Sarah's heart pounded against her ribs as she pulled her children tighter against her chest. A low, rumbling growl cut through the howling wind. "What's that noise?" Noah asked, his small voice barely audible. Before Sarah could answer, the tent flap rustled. She grabbed the only weapon she had, a small pocket knife, and positioned herself between her children and whatever lurked outside. The flap moved again, and in the dim light, Sarah found herself staring into the dark eyes of an enormous brown bear. Its breath fogged in the freezing air, its massive head larger than her entire torso. Sarah couldn't scream, she couldn't move. All she could do was stare at the creature that could end their lives with a single swipe of its powerful paw. But something in the bear's eyes made her pause. There was no aggression there, no predatory gleam. Instead, the bear seemed almost curious. The creature tilted its head, studying the frightened family with what Sarah could only describe as concern. It sniffed the air, then looked directly at the children huddled behind their mother. Noah whimpered softly, burying his face in his sister's shoulder. "Please," Sarah whispered, though she knew the animal couldn't understand. "Please don't hurt my children." The bear blinked slowly. Then, to Sarah's astonishment, it backed away from the tent entrance, but it didn't leave. Instead, it circled the small campsite, its massive form visible through the thin tent walls as it moved around them. What was it doing? Was it looking for food, planning an attack? The last embers of their campfire had died hours ago, leaving them without heat. Sarah knew that without warmth, her children wouldn't survive the night. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and hypothermia was a real threat. She had to do something, bear or no bear. "Stay here," she whispered to her children. "I need to try to restart the fire." "Don't go, Mommy," Lily pleaded, clutching her mother's sleeve. "The bear will eat you." Sarah swallowed hard. "I won't go far, I promise." She unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The bear had moved to the edge of their small clearing and was watching them intently, its massive body silhouetted against the snow-covered trees. Taking a deep breath, Sarah slipped out of the tent. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath away. Her fingers were already numb as she fumbled with the matches, trying desperately to ignite the wet kindling. "Please," she begged, striking match after match, watching each flame sputter and die. The bear moved again, and Sarah froze. It was coming toward her, its huge paws leaving deep prints in the fresh snow. She braced herself for an attack, But what happened next would change everything she thought she knew about the wild creatures of the forest. The massive bear approached Sarah slowly, its breath forming clouds in the frigid air. She remained perfectly still, her heart thundering in her chest. The children watched in horror from the tent, Lily's hand clamped over her mouth to stifle her scream. Instead of attacking, the bear stopped a few feet away. It sniffed the air, then turned and lumbered toward a cluster of fallen branches half buried in snow. With one massive paw, it brushed away the snow and dragged several large branches toward the dead campfire. Sarah couldn't believe her eyes. Was this actually happening, or was the cold causing her to hallucinate? "Mommy!" Noah called out, his tiny voice high with fear. "Come back!" The bear's head swung toward the tent, and Sarah's blood ran cold. But again, the creature showed no aggression. Instead, it continued pulling branches to the fire pit, creating a sizable pile of potential firewood. Sarah took a tentative step toward the wood. The bear backed away, watching her with those strangely intelligent eyes. With trembling hands, she gathered the driest pieces and arranged them in the fire pit. Her fingers were so numb she dropped the matches twice before managing to strike one successfully. The small flame caught on a bit of dry bark, and Sarah leaned close, blowing gently until it spread to the smaller twigs. "Please, please, please," she whispered to the fledgling flame. The bear watched from several yards away, sitting on its haunches like an oversized dog. As the fire gradually grew, Sarah felt a surge of hope. She added larger pieces of wood, and soon a respectable fire was blazing. The warmth on her face brought tears to her eyes. "Lily, Noah, come out carefully," she called. "We have a fire." The children emerged cautiously, their eyes immediately fixing on the enormous bear. Noah clung to his sister, his small body trembling. "Don't look at it directly," Sarah whispered, pulling them close to the fire. "Just stay by me." For several minutes they huddled by the flames, the warmth gradually seeping back into their frozen limbs. The bear remained at the edge of the clearing, occasionally sniffing the air or pawing at the snow. It seemed to be waiting. "Mommy, is the bear going to eat us?" Noah whispered. Sarah stroked his hair. "I don't think so, sweetheart. I think it's helping us." Lily looked up at her mother with disbelief. "Bears don't help people. Miss Patterson taught us that bears are dangerous." "I know, but this one—" Sarah trailed off, unable to explain the animal's bizarre behavior. The night grew colder. The wind picked up, driving the snowflakes horizontally through the air. Their fire, though welcome, wouldn't be enough to keep them alive through the night. Sarah knew this with a growing sense of dread. Their tent offered minimal protection, and their sleeping bags weren't rated for such extreme temperatures. As if sensing her thoughts, the bear rose to its feet. Sarah tensed, instinctively pulling her children behind her. The massive creature shook the snow from its fur and approached their campsite again. This time, it circled around until it reached the side of the tent most exposed to the wind. Then, to Sarah's utter amazement, it lay down, creating a furry windbreak that immediately cut the brutal force of the gale. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, unable to process what she was seeing. "The bear is protecting us," Lily whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Noah, ever trusting, smiled for the first time in hours. "It's a nice bear, Mommy." The fire crackled, casting long shadows across the snow. With the bear blocking the wind, the small area around their campfire became almost bearable. Sarah's mind raced, trying to make sense of their situation. Wild animals didn't behave this way. They didn't gather firewood or shield humans from the elements. It defied everything she knew about nature. As the night deepened, Sarah kept the fire burning with the wood the bear had gathered. The children eventually grew drowsy, the warmth and relative safety allowing exhaustion to overtake their fear. They leaned against Sarah, their eyelids growing heavy. "Try to rest," she told them, kissing the tops of their heads. "I'll keep watch." "Promise you won't leave us?" Lily murmured, already half asleep. "I promise," Sarah said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere." As the children drifted off, Sarah found herself in the strangest situation she could imagine. Alone in a snowstorm with her sleeping children, kept alive by a fire and protected by a wild bear. She studied the creature in the firelight. It was enormous, its fur thick and brown with hints of silver around the muzzle. An older bear, perhaps. Its eyes, when it occasionally glanced her way, held an intelligence that unsettled her. Around midnight, the fire began to die down again. Sarah was reluctant to leave her sleeping children to gather more wood, but the alternative was freezing. She gently extracted herself from their embrace and stood up. Immediately, the bear lifted its head, watching her. "I need more wood," she said softly, feeling foolish for speaking to a wild animal. To her shock, the bear rose and disappeared into the darkness. Minutes later, it returned, dragging another collection of branches. Sarah stared in disbelief. "Thank you," she whispered, the words inadequate for what she was feeling. She added wood to the fire, the fresh flames illuminating something she hadn't noticed before, a scar running down the bear's right front leg, old and healed but clearly visible in the firelight. This bear had known injury, known pain. Perhaps it understood suffering in a way most wild creatures did not. The night wore on. An uneasy alliance formed between woman and bear. Whenever the fire threatened to die, the creature would gather more wood. Whenever the wind shifted, it would reposition itself to block the worst of the blast. And all the while, Sarah's children slept, unaware of the miracle unfolding around them. Just before dawn, Sarah heard a new sound cutting through the howling wind, the distant roar of an engine. Her heart leaped. Someone was out there, perhaps searching for them. She stood up, straining to locate the direction of the sound. The bear heard it too. It rose to its full height, towering above her in the fading darkness. For the first time, Sarah felt a flicker of fear. Would the creature revert to its wild nature if humans approached? Would it attack to protect its territory? "Please," she whispered to the bear, "they can help us." The bear looked at her, then at the sleeping children. A moment of understanding seemed to pass between woman and beast. Then, with a soft huff, the bear turned and lumbered toward the tree line, pausing once to look back before disappearing into the forest. The engine sound grew louder. Sarah grabbed a burning branch from the fire and waved it above her head, hoping to attract attention. "Here!" she shouted. "We're over here!" Lily and Noah stirred, woken by their mother's cries. "What's happening?" Lily asked, rubbing her eyes. "I think help is coming," Sarah told her, continuing to wave the flaming branch. "And our friend is gone." "The bear left?" Noah's voice was small, almost disappointed. "Yes, sweetheart. It went back to the forest where it belongs." The sound of engines grew closer, and suddenly the beams of headlights cut through the trees. Sarah waved frantically, her voice growing hoarse from shouting. The vehicle, a large snowplow, stopped at the edge of their clearing, and two men jumped out. "My God!" one of them called. "There's people out here. Frank, radio for an ambulance." As the men rushed toward them, Sarah felt her legs give way beneath her. Relief washed over her in a wave so powerful it left her dizzy. They were found. They would survive. "Ma'am, are you all right? What are you doing out here?" The younger man wrapped a thermal blanket around her shoulders. Sarah looked at him, then at her children. then at the tree line where the bear had disappeared. How could she possibly explain what had happened? Who would believe her? "Our car broke down," she said simply. "We got lost trying to find help." "You're lucky to be alive," the older man said, helping Lily and Noah into thermal blankets. "This storm's the worst we've had in decades. Temperature dropped to 30 below last night." "We had help," Noah said innocently, looking up at the man with wide eyes. The man chuckled. "Well, someone up there was looking out for you, that's for sure." "It wasn't someone up there," Lily said, pointing toward the forest. "It was a big bear. It brought us wood for the fire and kept the wind away." The men exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of concern and disbelief. The younger one leaned toward Sarah. "Kids have quite an imagination, don't they?" Sarah looked toward the tree line, where large paw prints led away from their campsite. "Yes," she said softly. "Quite an imagination." As they were helped toward the snowplow, Sarah noticed something on the ground near where the bear had first approached them, a glint of metal half buried in the snow. She stooped to pick it up, brushing away the ice crystals. It was a small, worn locket, the kind that held family photos. The clasp was broken, and it looked as though it had been in the elements for months, if not years. With trembling fingers, Sarah opened it. Inside was a faded photograph of a smiling woman with a young girl. The girl couldn't have been more than 10 years old, with long braids and a gap-toothed smile. She was wearing a bright red jacket, the exact same shade as the one Lily was wearing now. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She slipped the locket into her pocket, her mind racing with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. "Ma'am, we need to get you and the kids to the hospital," the older man called. "Ambulance is meeting us at the main road." Sarah nodded, taking one last look at the place where the bear had stood guard through the night. "Thank you," she whispered to the empty forest. "Whoever you are, thank you." The hospital in the small town of Pine Ridge was warm and brightly lit, a stark contrast to the frozen darkness they had endured. Sarah sat on the edge of a bed in the emergency room, watching as nurses checked Lily and Noah for signs of frostbite and hypothermia. Miraculously, the children were largely unharmed, cold, hungry, and frightened, but otherwise healthy. "You must have done something right out there," Dr. Bennett said, reviewing their charts. He was an older man with kind eyes and a salt and pepper beard. "In those conditions, exposure should have been much worse." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The locket weighed heavily in her pocket, its presence a reminder of something she couldn't explain. The bear, the photograph, the strange coincidence of the red jacket. It was all too much to process. "Sheriff Mills wants to talk to you when you're feeling up to it," the doctor continued. "Search and Rescue has been looking for you since yesterday afternoon, when you didn't arrive at your sister's place." Sarah's sister, Rebecca, had been frantic when they didn't show up as planned. The sisters hadn't seen each other in years, not since Sarah's husband, Mark, had walked out, leaving her to raise 2 young children alone. This trip was supposed to be a fresh start, a chance to rebuild family connections. Instead, it had nearly ended in tragedy. "Ms. Mitchell?" A tall man in a sheriff's uniform appeared in the doorway. "I'm Sheriff Mills. Glad to see you and the kids are okay." Sarah shook his offered hand. "Thank you for finding us. Actually, it was pure luck that road crew spotted your fire. They were clearing the mountain pass and happened to see the flames." He pulled out a small notebook. "Can you tell me what happened?" Sarah recounted the basic facts: the car breaking down, the sudden storm, getting lost in the woods. She left out any mention of the bear, not wanting to sound delusional. But Lily, ever observant, noticed the omission. "Mommy, you forgot about our bear friend," she said innocently. Sheriff Mills raised an eyebrow. "Bear friend?" Sarah sighed. "The children think a bear helped us survive the night. Kids and their imaginations, right?" The sheriff studied her for a moment. "What kind of bear?" The question caught Sarah off guard. She had expected dismissal, not interest. "A brown bear, I think. Large, with some gray around the muzzle." "And a scar on its right foreleg?" the sheriff asked quietly. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. "How did you know that?" Sheriff Mills looked around, then pulled a chair close to Sarah's bed, lowering his voice. "Because you're not the first person to be saved by that bear." "What?" Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. "It started about 3 years ago," Mills explained. "A hiker got caught in a flash flood up near Eagle Ridge. Swore up and down that a bear pulled him from the river and stayed with him until search teams arrived. Everyone thought he was delirious from hypothermia." Sarah's hand went to her pocket, feeling the outline of the locket. "And then?" 6 months later, a family of tourists got stranded when their car went off the road in a snowstorm. The parents said a bear led them to a cave and brought them pine boughs to use as bedding. Last winter, 2 teenage boys got lost hunting. Same story. Bear guided them to safety. "That's impossible," Sarah whispered. Sheriff Mills nodded. "I'd have said the same thing, except I've interviewed all these people. Their stories are consistent. Brown bear, gray muzzle, scar on the right foreleg, and they all reported the same strange behavior. Gathering wood, blocking wind, leading people to shelter." Sarah hesitated, then pulled the locket from her pocket. "I found this near our campsite. It was in the snow where the bear first appeared." The sheriff took it carefully, studying the photograph inside. His expression changed, a flash of recognition crossing his features. "Oh my God," he murmured. "What, do you know who they are?" Sarah asked. Sheriff Mills closed the locket and handed it back to her, his hands less steady than before. "That's Hannah and Sophie Winters. They went missing in these woods 3 years ago, just before the bear sightings started." "Missing?" Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with her recent ordeal. Hannah was a wildlife biologist, studying black bears in the national forest. She took her daughter, Sophie, on a research trip one weekend. They never came back. Search teams combed these mountains for weeks, but never found a trace. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. Hannah had this theory about bear consciousness, that they were more aware, more intelligent than we give them credit for. Her colleagues thought she was pushing the boundaries of science into something more spiritual. Sarah thought of the bear's eyes, so knowing, so deliberate in its actions. "What happened to them?" "Officially?" "Presumed dead from exposure or animal attack. The case is still open, but after 3 years..." He shrugged, the gesture speaking volumes. "And the bear sightings started after they disappeared," Sarah said slowly. "The following winter," Mills confirmed. "Always the same description, always helping people in danger." He leaned closer. One thing all the encounters had in common: children were involved. The bear never approaches adults alone, only families with kids. Sarah looked over at Lily and Noah, who were now sitting up in their beds, coloring pictures a nurse had given them. Lily was still wearing her bright red jacket, the same shade as the jacket in the photograph. "Sheriff, what are you suggesting?" she asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. He stood up, straightening his uniform. "I'm not suggesting anything, Miss Mitchell. I'm just telling you what I know. What you choose to believe is up to you." As he turned to leave, Sarah called after him. "The locket, should I turn it in as evidence?" Mills looked back, his expression unreadable. That case is frozen colder than those mountains. One more missing piece of jewelry won't change anything now. He nodded toward her children. But it might mean something to them, knowing they had a guardian watching over them. After the sheriff left, Sarah sat in silence, turning the locket over in her hands. The entire encounter felt surreal, like something from a dream or a nightmare. Could the bear possibly be connected to the missing biologist and her daughter? The rational part of her mind rejected the idea immediately. Bears were wild animals, not supernatural beings. And yet, Miss Mitchell? A nurse appeared beside her bed. There's someone here who'd like to speak with you. An elderly man in a flannel shirt and worn jeans stood in the doorway. His weathered face bore the deep lines of someone who had spent a lifetime outdoors, and his eyes held a wisdom that reminded Sarah inexplicably of the bear. "Name's Joseph Running Elk," he said, his voice gravelly but gentle. "I heard about what happened to you and your young ones up on the mountain." "News travels fast," Sarah commented. Joseph smiled. "Small town. Not much happens here that everyone doesn't know about by sundown." He glanced at the locket in her hand. "Sheriff Mills told me about what you found." "You know the sheriff?" Sarah asked, suddenly suspicious. "Known him since he was no higher than my knee," Joseph confirmed. "I was a park ranger in these parts for 40 years before I retired. Now, I just listen to the forest and the creatures in it." He nodded toward the chair the sheriff had vacated. "May I?" Sarah nodded, and the old man sat down with a grateful sigh. "These old bones don't move like they used to," he said with a chuckle. "Mr. Running Elk, why are you here?" Sarah asked directly. "Because you've seen her," he replied simply. "The guardian bear." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What do you know about her?" Joseph's eyes took on a faraway look. "My people have stories about spirits who walk between worlds, humans who become animals, animals who carry human souls. Most folks these days dismiss such tales as superstition, but the old wisdom sometimes holds truths science can't explain." "You think the bear is, what? The spirit of Hannah Winters?" Sarah couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. Joseph shrugged. "I think there are mysteries in these mountains older than any of us. Hannah understood that. She respected the old ways, came to me often to hear the stories of my ancestors. She believed animals had souls as complex as our own." Sarah thought of the bear's deliberate actions, gathering wood, blocking wind, bringing more branches when the fire died down. No wild animal would behave that way. It was almost as if, "You said her," Sarah noted. "The bear I saw was enormous. Wouldn't that be a male?" Joseph smiled. "Female brown bears can grow nearly as large as males, especially older ones who've learned to survive well. And females are fiercer protectors by nature." He nodded toward Lily and Noah. "Especially of the young." Sarah opened the locket again, studying the faces of the woman and child frozen in time. "What happened to them, do you think?" "The official story is they got lost, died from exposure. But Hannah knew these woods better than most rangers. Some say they were attacked by a predator, a mountain lion, perhaps, or even a bear." "That would be ironic," Sarah murmured. "Indeed." Joseph leaned forward. "But there's another story, one that few people know. Hannah's research cabin was broken into the week before she disappeared. Someone stole her research notes, her computer, everything. She reported it, but you think someone deliberately harmed them?" Sarah was shocked. Hannah's research was controversial. She was documenting behaviors that challenged how we view animal intelligence. Some powerful research institutions had invested millions in opposing theories. And then there was the land development proposal she was fighting. A luxury resort that would have destroyed prime bear habitat. Sarah looked at the locket with new eyes. You think she was murdered because of her research? Joseph held up his hands. I'm an old man who tells stories. What I think doesn't matter. But the mountains know the truth, and sometimes they find ways to reveal it. Through a bear that saves stranded travelers, Sarah said flatly. The Ute people have a saying. The spirit chooses the form that will complete its work. Joseph stood up slowly. Keep the locket safe. It found its way to you for a reason. As the old man turned to leave, Sarah called after him. Wait, what am I supposed to do with this information? Joseph looked back, his eyes kind but serious. Live, love your children. Tell them stories of the guardian bear who watches over the lost and frightened. And perhaps when they're older, bring them back to these mountains. The forest remembers those who have been touched by its magic. With that cryptic statement, he nodded and walked away, leaving Sarah with more questions than answers. That night, as Lily and Noah slept peacefully in the hospital beds beside her, Sarah lay awake, the locket clutched in her hand. The faces of Hannah and Sophie Winters haunted her, as did the intelligent eyes of the bear who had saved their lives. Coincidence? Delusion brought on by fear and cold? Or something far more mysterious? Outside the hospital window, snow continued to fall on the small town of Pine Ridge, covering the mountains in a fresh blanket of white. Somewhere in those vast forests, a bear with a scarred foreleg moved silently through the trees, perhaps searching for others who needed saving, or perhaps searching for justice that had been long denied. Sarah made a decision then, in the quiet darkness of the hospital room. When the children were stronger, when spring came and the mountains turned green again, they would return. She would find Hannah's research cabin, learn more about the woman who had studied bears with such passion. And perhaps, if they were very lucky, they might catch a glimpse of their unlikely guardian once more. But for now, they were safe, they were warm, and they had a story that would stay with them forever, the night a bear became their protector in the frozen forest. 4. Return to the forest. Spring came to the mountains in a rush of green and gold. The snow melted, revealing meadows carpeted with wildflowers, and the forests echoed with the songs of returning birds. Sarah, Lily, and Noah drove up the winding mountain road, their small car packed with camping gear and supplies. Are we going to see the bear again? Noah asked from the back seat, his face pressed against the window as he watched the trees flash by. Sarah caught his eye in the rearview mirror. I don't know, sweetheart. Bears are wild animals. They don't usually stay in one place for long. But that wasn't entirely true, according to Joseph Running Elk. In the months since their rescue, Sarah had kept in touch with the old man, learning more about the legend of the guardian bear. According to him, the creature had remained in the same general area for 3 years, appearing only when people, specifically children, were in danger. Sarah had spent countless hours researching Hannah Winters and her work. The woman had been brilliant, passionate, and increasingly controversial in the scientific community. Her final research had focused on ursine cognition, the consciousness and emotional capacity of bears. She had documented behaviors that suggested bears possessed a level of awareness previously attributed only to primates and some marine mammals. Most of her colleagues had dismissed her findings as anthropomorphism, the tendency to project human traits onto animals, but a few had supported her, including Dr. Marcus Jennings, who now headed the biology department at the State University. Sarah had reached out to him, sharing her experience without revealing too much of her suspicions. Hannah was ahead of her time, Dr. Jennings had told her during their phone call. She saw connections others missed, patterns that challenged our understanding of animal intelligence. If she had lived to complete her research— He had trailed off then, his voice heavy with regret. "You think she was murdered," Sarah had said bluntly. The long pause before his answer had been telling. "I think there were people who stood to lose a great deal if her findings were verified. The Meridian Ridge Resort proposal alone represented billions in potential revenue, and her research was the primary obstacle to its approval." Now, as they approached the turnoff to the campground, Sarah felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. What exactly was she hoping to find here? Closure, answers, or something more personal? A connection to the mysterious force that had saved her children's lives. "Mommy, look!" Lily pointed excitedly at a wooden sign partially hidden by foliage. "Winter Research Station, private property." Sarah slowed the car, studying the narrow dirt track that led deeper into the forest. This had to be it, Hannah Winter's research cabin. Joseph had mentioned it was still standing, though abandoned since her disappearance. "Are we going there?" Lily asked, her eyes bright with excitement. Sarah hesitated. Technically, it would be trespassing, but if the property had belonged to Hannah, and she was presumed dead— "We'll set up camp first," she decided. "Then we can explore a little." They found a small clearing near a stream and pitched their tent. Noah helped gather stones for a fire ring, while Lily arranged their sleeping bags inside the tent. It was a world away from their last experience in these mountains. Warm sunshine instead of biting cold, birdsong instead of howling wind. Yet Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. After lunch, they followed the dirt track toward Hannah's cabin. The path was overgrown in places, suggesting few people had traveled it recently. After about 20 minutes of walking, they emerged into a small clearing. In the center stood a rustic cabin, its windows dark, a layer of pine needles and leaves covering the porch. "Is this where the bear lady lived?" Noah asked, clutching Sarah's hand. "Hannah Winters," Sarah corrected gently. "She was a scientist who studied bears." They approached cautiously. The door was locked, but Sarah found a key hidden under a flower pot. Exactly where Joseph had said it would be. The lock turned with a reluctant squeak, and the door swung open to reveal a space frozen in time. A thin layer of dust covered everything, but otherwise, the cabin looked as though its occupant had just stepped out for a moment. Books lined the shelves, notebooks were stacked on the desk, and photographs decorated the walls. Hannah in the field, Hannah with colleagues, and Hannah with a young girl who could only be Sophie. "Look, Mommy," Lily said, pointing to one photo in particular. It showed Hannah kneeling beside a tranquilized bear, her hand gently touching its scarred foreleg while Sophie watched from a safe distance. "It's our bear," Noah whispered, his eyes wide. Sarah stepped closer, studying the image. The bear in the photograph was indeed remarkably similar to their savior. Brown fur with silver around the muzzle, and a distinctive scar running down its right foreleg. "She called him Old Ghost," a voice said from the doorway. Sarah spun around to find Sheriff Mills standing on the threshold, his expression unreadable. "You followed us," she said, her voice tight with accusation. Mills shook his head. "Joseph told me you might come here. Thought you could use some help searching." "Searching for what?" "The truth." Mills removed his hat, turning it in his hands. That bear in the photo, Hannah had been tracking him for years. He was the focus of her research on bear intelligence. The scar came from a poacher's trap when he was younger. Hannah found him, treated the wound, and released him. After that, he let her observe him from much closer than most wild bears would tolerate. Sarah glanced at the children, who were exploring the cabin with curious eyes. Sheriff, why were Hannah's files stolen? Who would want to stop her research? Mills sighed, his weathered face showing his age. That's what I've been trying to figure out for 3 years. The official investigation focused on her getting lost in the woods, but I never bought it. Hannah knew these mountains too well. He stepped into the cabin, looking around with a familiarity that suggested he'd been there before. After you told me about your experience, I reopened some lines of inquiry, started looking into who benefited from her disappearance. And, Sarah prompted when he fell silent. Meridian Resort Group got their permit 6 months after she vanished. Construction starts next spring. The CEO, Richard Blackwood, had personally visited Hannah twice in the weeks before she disappeared, allegedly to discuss a compromise. Sarah's mind raced. You think this Blackwood was involved? Mills shrugged. Can't prove anything. Man's got alibi solid as concrete for the entire week Hannah went missing. But one of his security consultants, a man named Victor Crane, doesn't. And Crane has a military background with special ops training. A cold feeling settled in Sarah's stomach. A professional. Exactly. Mills looked at the photograph of Hannah and the bear. The thing that never made sense was why no bodies were ever found. These mountains give up their dead eventually. Hikers, climbers who fell, even murder victims. But we never found a trace of Hannah or Sophie. Sarah thought of the locket, now hanging around her neck beneath her shirt. She had kept it close since that night, drawn to it in a way she couldn't explain. What if they survived somehow? What if they're still out there? Mills gave her a sympathetic look. Sarah, it's been 3 years. No one could survive in these mountains that long without being seen. No human, maybe, Sarah said quietly, voicing the thought that had been growing in her mind since their rescue. But what if... A scream from outside cut her off. Lily's scream. Sarah bolted for the door, Mills right behind her. Outside, Lily stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, pointing toward the trees. Noah was beside her, his eyes wide with wonder rather than fear. "It's her!" he cried. "It's our bear!" At the forest's edge, partially hidden by the shadows of the pines, stood a massive brown bear. It watched them with familiar intelligent eyes, its scarred foreleg clearly visible. Mills drew his weapon instinctively, but Sarah placed a hand on his arm. "No," she said firmly, "she won't hurt us." The bear made no aggressive moves. It simply watched, as if waiting for something. Then, slowly, it turned and began walking into the forest, stopping after a few yards to look back at them. "She wants us to follow," Lily said with absolute certainty. Mills shook his head. "That's crazy. Bears don't lead people anywhere except to their deaths." Sarah looked at her children, then at the bear, then back at the cabin where a brilliant woman had once studied the consciousness of these magnificent creatures. "What if they do?" she whispered. What if Hannah was right all along? Making a decision that defied all logic and self-preservation, Sarah took her children's hands. "Stay close to me," she instructed them. "Sarah, this is insane," Mills protested. "You can't follow a wild animal into the forest." "You can come with us or stay here," Sarah told him, her voice steady with newfound conviction. "But we're going." Mills holstered his weapon with a muttered curse. "I must be losing my mind," he grumbled, falling into step beside them. The bear led them deeper into the forest, following a path only it could see. It moved deliberately, stopping occasionally to ensure they were still following. After nearly an hour of hiking, they reached a series of rocky outcroppings that formed a natural shelter. The bear paused at the entrance to a narrow crevice, looking back at them once more, before disappearing inside. "No way," Mills said firmly. "We are not following a bear into a cave." But Sarah was already moving forward, drawn by a force she couldn't explain. "Hello?" she called into the darkness. "Is anyone there?" Silence greeted her, broken only by the sound of water dripping somewhere in the cave. Mills reluctantly produced a flashlight, illuminating the narrow passage. "If we're doing this, we're doing it properly," he muttered. They entered the crevice single file, Sarah first, then the children, with Mills bringing up the rear. The passage widened after several yards, opening into a surprisingly large cavern. The bear was nowhere to be seen, but signs of habitation were everywhere. A fire pit with ashes, makeshift shelving carved into the rock walls, even crude furniture fashioned from logs and branches. "Someone lives here," Mills whispered, his flashlight beam dancing across the walls. On one wall, illuminated by the flashlight, was a collection of drawings, childish at first, then progressively more skilled. Images of bears, trees, mountains, and two human figures repeated throughout the artwork. In the corner, neatly stacked, were notebooks filled with dense handwriting. Sarah picked one up with trembling hands, reading the first page. "Observation log, day 487 of isolation. Sophie's fever has broken, and the berries we gathered yesterday have provided essential vitamins. Old Ghost brought a fish to the cave entrance this morning, the third this week. His behavior continues to defy conventional understanding of ursine cognition." "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. "It's Hannah's writing. She survived." Mills took the notebook, his expression stunned. "This is dated 2 years after she disappeared. Where is she now?" A sound at the back of the cave drew their attention. A soft shuffling, followed by what could have been a whisper. Mills directed his flashlight toward the noise, revealing another, smaller passage. "Hello?" Sarah called again. "Is someone there?" From the shadows, a figure emerged slowly. Not Hannah, as they had hoped, but a girl. No longer the child from the photograph, but a teenager now, thin and wild-looking, with long, tangled hair and clothes patched together from animal hides and tattered fabric. Her eyes, wide and wary, moved from Sarah to the children to Mills, lingering longest on the sheriff's uniform. "Sophie," Mills said softly, lowering his flashlight so it wouldn't blind her. "Sophie Winters?" The girl took a step back, her body tensing as if preparing to flee. She looked nothing like the smiling child in the Locket's photograph, yet the resemblance was there in the shape of her eyes, the curve of her jawline. "It's okay," Sarah said, her voice gentle. "We're friends. We're not going to hurt you." Sophie's gaze darted to the cave entrance, then back to them. When she spoke, her voice was raspy from disuse, the words halting as if she had forgotten how to form them properly. "You followed Ghost." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Sarah confirmed, her heart racing. "The bear led us here. We've met before. He saved us in the winter storm." Understanding dawned in Sophie's eyes. The woman, 2 children, in the snow. She nodded slowly. "Ghost told me." Mills exchanged a bewildered glance with Sarah. "Told you?" he repeated. Sophie made a gesture with her hands, mimicking communication rather than literal speech. "Not words, feelings, images," she tapped her temple. "In here." Lily stepped forward, her natural curiosity overcoming her shyness. "Where's your mom? Is she here too?" A shadow passed over Sophie's face. "Mom, gone, 2 winters ago." Her eyes filled with tears that she quickly blinked away. Sick, very sick, no medicine. Sarah felt her throat tighten. After surviving for a year in the wilderness, Hannah had still died, leaving her daughter alone in this cave. Sophie, how have you survived out here by yourself? Not alone, Sophie said firmly, gesturing around the cave. Ghost protects, brings food, keeps away danger. Her expression softened. Other bears help too sometimes. Mom taught them. Before. Mills holstered his flashlight, his professional skepticism visibly warring with the evidence before his eyes. Sophie, what happened the day you and your mom disappeared? Were you attacked? Sophie's face darkened. Bad men, 3 guns. She made a shooting motion with her hand. Looking for Mom's papers, said we saw too much. What did you see? Sarah asked gently. Dead bears. Sophie's voice hardened. Many, not for food, for parts. She struggled with the word. Men taking parts to sell. Mom had pictures. Evidence. She pointed to a section of the cave wall where a waterproof bag hung from a rocky outcropping. Still there, hidden. Mills walked over and carefully took down the bag. Inside were a sealed waterproof case containing a camera, several memory cards, and a notebook protected by plastic sheeting. He examined them briefly, his expression grim. Poachers, he said. Killing bears for their gallbladders, paws, other parts to sell on the black market. Worth a fortune in certain markets. And your mom had evidence, Sarah said to Sophie. That's why they came after you. Sophie nodded. Men work for big company, same company that wants to build on mountain. Meridian Resort Group, Mills supplied, his jaw tight. Blackwood. How did you escape? Sarah asked. Sophie's face took on a distant look, as if seeing events from long ago. Mom heard them coming. We ran into forest. She pantomimed running. They followed, shot at us. She pulled aside her hair to reveal a small scar along her temple. Almost got me. My God, Sarah whispered. Then Ghost came. Sophie's expression transformed, something like reverence crossing her features. Attacked bad men. Gave us time to hide. We found cave. Stayed hidden. Mom said too dangerous to go back. But why didn't you try to reach town once you knew you were safe? Mills asked. Hannah had friends who would have helped. Sophie shook her head firmly. Not safe. Mom said men have friends everywhere. Police. Government. Wait for evidence to be found. She gestured to the bag Mills was holding. Proof. Mills looked offended. I would have helped you. Mom didn't know who to trust, Sophie said simply. So we stayed. Learned to live here. Ghost helped. Other animals too. She smiled faintly. Mom said we became part of forest. Sarah thought of the locket around her neck. She pulled it out, opening it to show Sophie the photograph inside. I found this near our campsite, the night the bear, Ghost, saved us. Sophie's eyes widened. She reached for the locket with trembling fingers. Mom's. Her mother gave to her. Tears welled in her eyes as she touched the photograph. Last winter, before she died, she gave to Ghost, said, find help. We didn't know if he understood, but he understood, Lily said with childlike certainty. He was looking for someone to help you. Noah nodded enthusiastically. And he found us. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The implications were staggering. A bear that not only protected humans but sought help for a stranded girl, carrying a locket as a sort of message. It defied scientific explanation. Yet here was Sophie, living proof of Hannah's controversial theories about bear intelligence and emotional capacity. Mills cleared his throat. Sophie, I need to get you to town, get you checked by a doctor, and this evidence, He lifted the bag. It could put away the people who tried to kill you and your mother. Fear flashed across Sophie's face. No, not safe. She backed away, deeper into the cave. Ghost says danger's still there. Company men still looking. Ghost says, Mills repeated skeptically. Sophie tapped her head again. Feelings, images, he knows. Sarah placed a hand on Mills' arm. Sheriff, what if she's right? What if Blackwood does have people watching? If they've been covering up poaching operations for years, they'd have a lot to lose if Sophie suddenly reappeared with evidence. Mills considered this, his experienced lawman's face troubled. You may have a point, but we can't leave her out here. I won't go, Sophie stated firmly, standing straighter. Despite her wild appearance, there was a dignity to her stance, a hint of the scientist's daughter she had once been. This is home now. I belong to Forrest. Sophie, Sarah said gently, you're just a child. You need proper care, education, a normal life. Sophie shook her head. Not child, 16 now. She gestured to the notebooks stacked neatly against the wall. Learn from Mom's books, and Forrest teaches. Her eyes, wise beyond her years, met Sarah's. Different life, not wrong life. Mills sighed heavily. At least let us bring you supplies, proper food, medicine, clothing. Sophie studied him, then nodded slowly. But promise, no tell about cave. No tell about ghost. Sophie, people need to know the truth about what happened to you and your mother, Mills argued. Truth is dangerous, Sophie countered. Men who killed Mom still free. Still powerful. She pointed to the evidence bag. Use that, make them pay, then may be safe to return. Sarah felt torn. The girl had survived for years in this cave, evidently with the help of a bear that defied all conventional understanding of animal behavior. Yet leaving her here seemed wrong, against everything society would consider proper for a teenage girl. What about winter? Sarah asked practically. How do you stay warm? Sophie led them deeper into the cave, where a surprising degree of organization became evident. One section held carefully preserved food, dried meat, fish, and berries. Another contained hides and furs fashioned into bedding. A small natural chimney in the rock allowed smoke from the fire pit to escape without revealing the cave's location. Ghost brings wood, Sophie explained, learns from watching humans. Smart. She patted a pile of thick furs. Warm enough. Watching Sophie move comfortably through her primitive but effective living space, Sarah realized the girl had adapted to a life few modern humans could comprehend. She had become something unique, neither fully civilized nor fully wild, but a bridge between worlds, much like the bear that protected her. We can't force her to leave, Sarah told Mills quietly. And if what she says about Blackwood and his people is true, exposing her could put her in danger. Mills nodded reluctantly. I'll take the evidence back, start an investigation, quietly, go through channels I trust personally. He looked at Sophie with newfound respect. But I'm still bringing you supplies, that's non-negotiable. Sophie smiled. A genuine smile that transformed her feral appearance, revealing the girl she might have been in another life. Thank you. A sound at the cave entrance drew their attention. Ghost had returned, his massive form silhouetted against the light outside. Sophie immediately went to him, placing a hand on his broad head with a familiarity that stunned the visitors. The bear tolerated her touch, his intelligent eyes surveying the humans in his domain. He wants to know if you'll help, Sophie said simply. Sarah found herself moving forward as if in a dream. The bear watched her approach, neither threatening nor retreating. When she was just a few feet away, he lowered his head slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. "We'll help," Sarah promised, the words feeling like a vow. "We'll make sure they pay for what they did to your mother." Ghost's eyes held hers for a long moment, and Sarah had the uncanny sensation that the animal understood every word. Then he turned and ambled back toward the forest, pausing once to look back, at Sophie, at the visitors, at the cave that had become a sanctuary against human cruelty. "He goes to patrol," Sophie explained, "always watching, keeping safe." As they prepared to leave, Sophie pressed something into Sarah's hand. A small carving made of antler, shaped like a bear. "For children," she said, "to remember." "We'll come back," Sarah promised. "With supplies, news about the investigation. You won't be alone anymore." Sophie looked around the cave, then out toward the forest where Ghost had disappeared. "Never alone," she said with quiet certainty. "Forest family now." The photo files in Hannah's notebooks proved to be explosive. They contained not only evidence of extensive poaching operations, but detailed documentation linking the activities directly to a subsidiary of Meridian Resort Group. Mills, true to his word, kept Sophie's existence a secret while working with trusted federal wildlife officials to build a case. 3 months after their discovery of the cave, Richard Blackwood and 5 of his executives were arrested on charges ranging from conspiracy and wildlife trafficking to accessory to attempted murder. The case made national headlines, with Hannah Winters posthumously hailed as a hero who had sacrificed everything to expose environmental crimes. Sarah, Lily, and Noah returned to the cave regularly, bringing supplies, books, and news from the outside world. Sophie accepted their help gratefully but remained firm in her decision to stay in the forest. The cave had become more comfortable with the addition of proper bedding, tools, and a small solar charger for a tablet loaded with educational materials, yet it retained its primitive character, a place between worlds, much like Sophie herself. Ghost continued his vigilant patrol of the forest, sometimes disappearing for days but always returning to check on Sophie. Other bears began to appear as well, younger ones that seemed to defer to Ghost's authority. Sophie explained that they were cubs he had protected over the years, now grown but still connected to him. "Like family," she said, watching a young female bear forage near the cave entrance under Ghost's watchful eye. "He teaches them. They learn to trust some humans." She looked pointedly at Lily and Noah, who had gradually been allowed closer to the younger bears. "Children especially." The legend of the guardian bear spread throughout the region, despite Mill's efforts to keep Sophie's story confidential. Hikers and campers reported encounters with a massive brown bear that seemed to watch over the forest, appearing when travelers were in distress and leading them to safety. The National Park Service posted warnings urging people not to seek out or approach bears, but privately, rangers spoke of Ghost with a mixture of awe and gratitude. One evening in late summer, as they sat around a campfire near Sophie's cave, Mills arrived with news. His face was grave as he joined their circle. "The federal prosecutors want Sophie to testify," he said without preamble. "They've built a strong case against Blackwood and his people, but Sophie's first-hand account of the attack would seal it." Sophie tensed visibly. "Go to city? To court?" "Yes," Mills confirmed. "You'd be under protection the entire time, and once it's over, you'd have options. The government would provide for your education, housing, whatever you need to transition back to society." "Or?" Sophie asked, sensing there was more. Mills smiled faintly. "Or you could be officially recognized as a ward of the state while remaining in your current situation, with regular welfare checks and support, of course. You're 16 now. In 2 years, you'd be considered an adult and could make your own legal decisions completely." Sophie stared into the fire, her expression unreadable. Ghost? The entire area around this cave would be designated a protected wildlife research zone, Mills explained. No hunting, no development. The research Hannah started could be continued by scientists who share her vision. Sarah watched emotions play across Sophie's face: fear, hope, uncertainty. "You don't have to decide right now," she said gently. Sophie looked up at the darkening sky, then toward the forest where Ghost had disappeared earlier that day. "Need to ask him," she said simply. As if summoned by her thoughts, a rustling in the underbrush announced Ghost's return. The massive bear emerged from the trees, approaching the campfire with a confidence no wild animal should possess. He stopped several yards away, watching the humans with his intelligent gaze. Sophie rose and walked to him, placing her hand on his broad head in that familiar gesture that still amazed Sarah. They remained that way for several long moments, girl and bear, connected by something beyond words. When Sophie returned to the fire, her decision was clear in her eyes. "I will go," she said firmly. "For Mom, for Ghost, for Forrest." She looked at Sarah. "But not alone. You come too." Sarah felt something catch in her throat, part surprise, part emotion. Over these past months, she had grown attached to this strange, wise girl who had survived against impossible odds. "Of course," she said without hesitation. "We'll all be there with you." "And Ghost?" Sophie asked, looking at Mills. The sheriff rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "That's complicated. But I think we can arrange for the testimony to take place somewhere that allows him to be nearby. Not in the courtroom, obviously, but he needs to be close," Sophie insisted. "He gives strength." Mills nodded, already calculating the logistics and inevitable bureaucratic battles. "We'll make it work." That night, as the children slept in the tent they had pitched near the cave, Sarah sat with Sophie under the stars. The girl who had grown up wild was looking at the night sky with a mixture of wonder and apprehension. "Scared," Sophie admitted quietly. "City, people, court." Sarah squeezed her hand gently. "It's okay to be scared, but you won't be facing it alone." "What if—" Sophie struggled to find the words. "What if can't go back to normal life?" Sarah considered this thoughtfully. Maybe there's no going back. Maybe there's just going forward into a new kind of life. She looked at the sleeping form of Ghost, who had settled at the forest's edge like a guardian statue. "You've experienced something extraordinary, Sophie. Something that's changed you forever. But that doesn't mean you can't find a place in both worlds." Sophie nodded slowly, taking comfort from these words. "Like Ghost. Not fully wild, not fully tame, in between." "Exactly," Sarah agreed. "In between can be a powerful place to be." A soft huff from Ghost drew their attention. The bear had raised his head, his ears perked toward the forest. A moment later, he rose to his feet, staring intently into the darkness. "What is it?" Sarah whispered. Sophie closed her eyes, her face taking on that distant expression she wore when communing with the bear. "Someone coming," she said suddenly, her eyes snapping open. "Men with guns." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "Wake the sheriff," she instructed, moving quickly to rouse her own children. Mills was on his feet instantly, weapon drawn. "How many?" he asked Sophie. "3, maybe 4. She pointed toward the ridge to the east. "Coming from there." "Blackwood's people," Mills growled. "Must have paid someone off, learned about the testimony." "The children," Sarah said urgently, gathering Lily and Noah close. "Into the cave," Mills ordered. "Deep as you can go. There's a back passage Sophie showed me last month, leads to a higher valley. If things go bad, that's your escape route." Sarah wanted to argue, to insist they all flee together, But she knew Mills needed to stay and confront the threat. And Sophie was already moving toward Ghost, her hand on his fur, her face set with determination. "What are you doing?" Sarah demanded. "Sophie, come with us." But the girl shook her head. "Ghost will protect like before." She looked at Mills. "We help." "Absolutely not," the sheriff said firmly. "You're a child, and you're the one they want." "Not child," Sophie corrected with quiet dignity. "Survivor. And know Forrest better than anyone." She gestured to the surrounding trees, the rocks, the shadows. "Home advantage." Mills clearly wanted to argue, but the sound of approaching voices made the decision for him. "Fine. But you stay hidden, understand? Guide me from cover. I'm the only one with a weapon." Ghost huffed softly, as if taking offense at this statement. Sophie smiled faintly. "Not only weapon," she said, patting the bear's massive shoulder. Sarah led Lily and Noah into the cave, her heart pounding with fear, but trusting Mills, and, strangely, Ghost to keep Sophie safe. As they reached the deeper chambers, Lily looked back, her young face troubled. "Will Sophie be okay?" she asked, her voice small in the darkness. Sarah wished she could offer reassurances, but the truth was they were facing armed men with only one sheriff, a teenage girl and a bear, however extraordinary, standing between them and harm. "Sophie has survived worse," she said finally, "and she has Ghost." Outside, Mills positioned himself behind a large boulder, his service weapon ready. Sophie had melted into the forest with Ghost, seemingly becoming part of the shadows themselves. The approaching voices grew louder, more distinct. "Should be just ahead," a gruff voice said. "Remember, the girl's the priority. Blackwood wants her silenced before the testimony." "What about the others?" another voice asked. "No witnesses," came the cold reply. Mills steeled himself. 4 against 1 were bad odds, but he had surprise on his side, and whatever Sophie and Ghost were planning. The men entered the clearing, their flashlights sweeping across the campsite. They wore dark clothing and carried hunting rifles modified for stealth. Mills recognized one of them. Victor Crane, Blackwood's security chief, the man suspected of hunting down Hannah and Sophie 3 years ago. "Check the tent," Crane ordered one of his men. "You two, the cave." Mills waited until the men had separated slightly, then made his move. "Police! Drop your weapons!" Instead of complying, the men immediately opened fire in his direction. Mills ducked as bullets splintered the rock above him. He returned fire, catching one man in the shoulder and sending him sprawling. The other 3 took cover, their training evident in their quick, coordinated movements. Mills knew he was outmatched. Where was Sophie? Where was Ghost? A blood-curdling roar answered his question. From the shadows to the right, Ghost charged into the clearing, a half-ton of fur and muscle moving with shocking speed. One of the gunmen screamed as massive jaws clamped onto his rifle, wrenching it away with enough force to dislocate his shoulder. Crane and the remaining man turned their weapons toward the bear, but before they could fire, a hail of stones fell from above. Sophie, having climbed one of the larger trees, was launching a barrage of projectiles she had gathered for just such a purpose. The distraction was enough. Mills emerged from cover and tackled Crane to the ground, knocking his weapon aside. They grappled in the dirt, Crane's military training making him a formidable opponent, despite Mills' determination. Ghost had the third man cornered against a tree, the man too terrified to move as the enormous bear stood on its hind legs, towering over him. The first man Mills had shot was trying to crawl toward his dropped weapon when Sophie dropped from the tree, landing nimble-footed beside him and kicking the gun away. "Not this time," she said, her voice cold as she stared down at one of the men who had hunted her as a child. Crane managed to land a solid blow to Mills' jaw, momentarily stunning the sheriff. He scrambled for his sidearm, bringing it up to take aim at Mills's head. A blur of motion, a sickening crunch, and Crane screamed in agony as Ghost's jaws closed around his gun hand. The bear didn't crush the bones. He could have easily, but applied just enough pressure to force Crane to drop the weapon before releasing him. With all four men disarmed and subdued, Mills quickly zip-tied their hands using restraints from his vehicle. Sophie stood beside Ghost, one hand resting on the bear's massive head, her eyes burning with the justice long denied to her mother. "Victor Crane," Mills said, checking the man's ID. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and I suspect when we dig deeper the actual murder of Hannah Winters." Crane spat blood onto the ground. "You've got nothing, and Blackwood's lawyers will have me out by morning." "I don't think so," came Sarah's voice from the cave entrance. She had returned once the gunfire stopped, carrying something in her hands. Hannah's camera. "Not when the jury sees your face in these photos from 3 years ago, hunting bears for their parts, and especially not when they hear Sophie's testimony about how you chased her and her mother through these mountains shooting at them." Crane's face went pale as he realized the full extent of the evidence against him. "The girl should be dead," he hissed. "You too, Hannah. How did you survive?" "Not Hannah," Sophie said quietly. "Hannah's daughter. And I survived because of him." She patted Ghost's fur. "He saved us then, saves us now." The bear watched Crane with unnerving intelligence, as if he recognized the man from that day 3 years ago. Perhaps he did. Perhaps, Sarah thought, there was far more awareness in those ancient eyes than humans had ever given bears credit for. As Mills radioed for backup and a transport for the prisoners, Sarah put an arm around Sophie's thin shoulders. "It's over," she said gently. "They can't hurt you anymore." Sophie leaned against her, suddenly looking very young and very tired. "Not over yet," she murmured. "Still court, still testimony. But after that," Sarah promised, "you'll be free to choose your own path, whatever that may be." Sophie looked up at Ghost, who had settled nearby, his watchful gaze never leaving the restrained men. "My path is with him," she said simply. "Where he goes, I go." Sarah had no doubt she meant it literally. This girl, who had grown up bridging the worlds of humans and wild creatures, would never fully return to civilization. But perhaps she didn't need to. Perhaps, like Ghost himself, Sophie's greatest purpose lay in the in-between spaces, helping others understand what Hannah had tried to teach, that the line between human and animal consciousness was not as clear as science had once believed. As dawn broke over the mountains, illuminating the campsite now crowded with police vehicles and forensic teams, Ghost slipped quietly back into the forest. He would return, Sarah knew. He always did. But for now, he was granting the humans space to handle their human business. Sophie watched him go, her expression peaceful. "He'll be waiting," she said confidently. "When it's time to come home."